Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a seriously epic story. We're talking unparalleled resilience, audacious vision, and the human driver behind the very era we are living in right now, the AI revolution. You know, if you really want to understand the machines that are completely reshaping our world, you first have to understand the architect who built their foundations.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because this is honestly one of the most massive contrasts in modern business history. I mean, we're looking at a trajectory that just completely defies conventional logic. Think about it. How does someone go from a highly disciplined, totally isolated environment for troubled youth to becoming the undisputed kingmaker of Silicon Valley?
Picture this for a second. An 18-year-old kid steps off a plane in Kentucky, clutching literally a single suitcase, carrying the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. Born in Taiwan, uprooted to the US, Huang ended up in a reform school dormitory basically due to a mix-up. But here's the thing. Instead of breaking him, those red brick classrooms and barbed wire fences actually forged his mental resilience. He learned discipline, he learned empathy. A spark of defiance was lit right there that would end up defining his entire career.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how wild this ride is. From that single suitcase in rural Kentucky, we arrive at a company valuation that has crossed the staggering $2 trillion mark. $2 trillion! This isn't just about making a successful product, right? It's about shifting the actual tectonic plates of the global economy. So to understand how we get to a number that massive, we've got to look closely at the exact steps he took to get here.
Section 1. Forged in the Crucible, the Early Years.
Let's trace how this actually happened. Born in Taiwan in 1963, Huang was this curious kid who was always taking apart radios at the kitchen table. By 1976, he's navigating that intense personal transformation we mentioned at the Farnham School in Kentucky, perfecting his English and really finding his grit. Fast forward a bit to 1993. After studying electrical engineering and basically obsessing over silicon efficiency in his dorm room, he sits down in a Denny's diner in Silicon Valley with Chris Malachowski and Curtis Preem. Armed with a pitch to completely reinvent graphics chips, they launch a $40 million startup right there over coffee.
Now, you might think they hit the ground running, but success was definitely not instant. Funding was incredibly hard to win, and their very first product, the NV1, well, it completely flopped because of poor DirectX compatibility. Yet, this is exactly where that Kentucky resilience kicks in. Adversity didn't break them, it taught them. They learned pretty quickly that they had to bet on open standards and iterate incredibly fast. And that failure cemented Huang's ruthlessly technical and brutally honest leadership style. A style which led directly to the Riva 128 in 1997, an absolute smash hit that permanently put them on the map.
Section 2. The GPU Paradigm Shift, Redefining Computing.
This brings us to a literal watershed moment in tech history, the 1999 release of the GeForce 256. NVIDIA marketed this as the world's first GPU, or graphics processing unit. By integrating hardware transform and lighting directly onto the chip itself, they absolutely stunned game developers. Real-time 3D rendering suddenly became mainstream. It became immersive. With this one move, NVIDIA leapfrogged heavy-hitting competitors of the era, companies like 3DFX, S3, and ATI.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the massive paradigm shift that happens next. Huang didn't just settle for dominating PC gaming. He started rebranding the GPU entirely. He stopped looking at it as just some tool to render video game pixels and started envisioning it as a broad, general-purpose computing engine. This is the exact pivot that transitioned NVIDIA from just making video games look pretty in the 90s to powering the simulation of proteins, driving autonomous cars, and literally running global artificial intelligence today.
Section 3. The decade-long CUDA gamble, a period of massive risk.
So, through the early 2000s, NVIDIA faced fierce competition. They had failed chip designs, lawsuits, the whole shebang. Yet, while fighting these massive fires, Huang was quietly pouring resources into this totally obscure initiative. In 2006, they unveiled CUDA. The idea here was to let software developers use GPUs for general parallel processing. Now, early critics completely dismissed it. They called it a niche project. It was a highly criticized gamble, and years passed with very little momentum. But then, deep learning pioneers like Geoffrey Hinton and Yann LeCun realized CUDA's sheer parallel processing power was exactly the engine they needed to train complex neural networks. Suddenly, almost overnight, NVIDIA's chips became the essential bedrock for AI labs worldwide.
Section 4. Building the AI platform, creating a strategic ecosystem.
Because here's the thing. Just selling chips was never the final goal. Huang's long-term vision was always to own the entire infrastructure of tomorrow. So to build this full-stack platform, NVIDIA executed some highly strategic acquisitions. They didn't just buy companies, they absorbed their cultures and elevated their talent. They grabbed 3DFX Interactive to solidify their graphics IP, they acquired Mellanox to secure the high-speed networking that is absolutely critical to tying together massive AI supercomputer clusters, and, actually, even though their attempted acquisition of ARM was ultimately blocked, it served as a massive signal to the market of NVIDIA's truly global, architectural ambitions.
And because of these moves, NVIDIA transitioned into this sprawling ecosystem. We're talking software libraries like CUDA, QDNN, and TensorRT, paired with massive DGX hardware supercomputers and simulation platforms like Omniverse. By the time the AI global arms race officially kicked off in 2020, cloud giants, I'm talking AWS, Google, Microsoft, they realized something kind of terrifying. They simply couldn't scale large language models like GPT or BERT without this specific NVIDIA ecosystem. Huang hadn't just built a chip, he'd built a platform that the entire tech industry was now utterly dependent on.
Let's move to Section 5 and see how this all builds to the leather jacket legacy, the leader himself.
So I've got to pose this question directly to you. In a Silicon Valley that's just packed with brilliant minds and cutthroat executives, what actually makes Jensen Huang different? How does he manage to maintain such an unusual yet wildly successful grip on his company?
Well, the answer is that he never really left the product trenches. He is an engineer first and a marketing showman second. This is a CEO who's known to be reading detailed product specs at 2 a.m., directly mentoring his engineers. He leads what are internally known as Jensen reviews, these intense meetings where ideas are dissected and debated, but entirely without ego. In his culture, failure isn't a reason for punishment, right? It's rigorously analyzed as a totally necessary stepping stone to innovation.
So the crucial point is really captured perfectly by a sentiment shared among his employees. He doesn't demand greatness, he inspires it. Huang built a legacy on rejecting the easy lure of short-term profits. Instead, he chose the agonizing decade-long path of platform building. He elevated a simple gaming chip maker into the strategic computing backbone of modern civilization, predicting these massive waves of AI, simulation, and robotics years before anyone else took them seriously.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. We've seen a teenage refugee with a single suitcase transform into the architect of the AI age. We are now living in a world powered by machines that can process, simulate, and essentially think, all running on his vision. As NVIDIA continues to push the absolute boundaries of what is computationally possible, what entirely new reality will Jensen Huang teach the world to dream up next? Thank you so much for joining this explainer.